Why should I believe in the resurrection of Jesus? In 1 Corinthians 15, the Apostle Paul writes that Jesus Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, and that he was raised from the dead 3 days later. And that this is of first importance. He says that the biggest thing, the most important thing about Christianity is that Jesus rose from the dead. So is there any good reason to believe that this is true? Well, where do we have the resurrection of Jesus recorded? That's in the New Testament, in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are biographies. They're called the Gospels, and they're biographies of Jesus' life, of his ministry, his life, his death, and his resurrection. The question is, do we have any reason to believe that the accounts are actually true? Well, let me give you just 3 reasons why I think we can believe that these accounts are accurate and true. The first is that they include embarrassing details. Now, what's that all about? There's something called the principle of embarrassment. When you go to a court of law, or if you speak to a detective or investigator, they'll tell you that there's something called the principle of embarrassment. And so if you're investigating a crime that happened or an account, and if someone sheds themselves in a poor light in an embarrassing way, the chance is that they're actually telling the truth. Well, why is that? If people are making up a story to make themselves look good or get out of trouble, they're probably not going to shed themselves in a poor light. Imagine there's someone who's driving their car and they're busy texting while they do that and end up plowing into the back of the guy parked in front of them. They get out, a policeman standing on the side comes and says, "Oh, well, what happened here?" And the guy, being very honest, says, "I'm so sorry, officer, I wasn't concentrating at all. I was on my phone and I know it's a crime, but I was, and I plowed into the back of this guy." The chances are that that's what happened. And this is what the principle of embarrassment does. So in the New Testament, in the Gospels, if you read them with this kind of eye, you'll see that we have many, many, many embarrassing details all the way through. If you look at the disciples, they're always portrayed as being slow and dim-witted. They're rebuked by Jesus, they're rebuked by each other. And one instance of this that really sticks out to me is that Peter, the Apostle Peter, who goes on to be the leader of the early church in Jerusalem, at one point is called Satan by Jesus. Now, if you're trying to make up a religion, as the charge would be, to get fame and power and all the things that come along with it, you are not going to make up some account in which your leader of the early church is called Satan by your leader. That's just not going to happen. And so the best explanation is that that is recorded as the way things happened. And that principle then applies to the New Testament. It is full of these embarrassing details all over the place. And these are then a pointer to the truthfulness of the accounts. If you're going to make up a religion for fame, glory, power, whatever it is, you wouldn't include all of the embarrassing details that we see in the New Testament. The next is enemy attestation. When you have someone who is a skeptic or an enemy, and they start telling things that actually corroborate an account, chances are that they're actually true accounts. Well, what do we have in this regard? We have Paul, the Apostle Paul. Well, he wasn't always the Apostle Paul. Before that, he was Saul of Tarsus, and he was a persecutor of the early church. His job was to go around and round up these Christians and put them in prison and even oversee their execution, which we have recorded for us in the New Testament. Paul was on his way to Damascus, and suddenly, as he records it himself, he encountered the risen Jesus Christ. And radically, suddenly, his life goes from being Saul, the persecutor of the church, to being Paul, one of the leaders of the new church, and someone who wrote actually most of the New Testament that we have. Another instance of this is James, the brother of Jesus. Many people don't know that Jesus actually had some half-brothers, and he did. James was one of them. In Jesus' life and ministry before his death and resurrection, James was a complete skeptic. He didn't believe any of this. He thought Jesus was nuts, out of his mind. He even tried to get him to go to Jerusalem to be captured and potentially even killed. We have, again, that recorded in the Bible for us. But what happens? Suddenly, after Jesus' resurrection, James, instead of being a skeptic, comes to be a believer, a leader in the early church and someone who wrote for us the book of James in the New Testament. Again, a sudden switch from being a skeptic to being someone who believes in Jesus. Now, you may have a brother or sister, and what would it take for you to start believing that they were indeed God in the flesh, could forgive sins, and all the many things that Jesus claimed? I think it would probably take something like a resurrection. And a final pointer to the truthfulness of the documents of the New Testament is martyrdom. Well, what's that all about? The writers of the New Testament account, the disciples, the early disciples of Jesus who walked with him, who claimed to be eyewitnesses, the ones who would have made up these accounts if they were fabrications, went to their deaths without giving up that they had seen Jesus risen from the dead. If you were the one to make up an account, as some claim that the New Testament and the resurrection accounts are just made up accounts, you would be in the best position when faced with crucifixion or stoning or being fed to the lions. You would be in the best position to step back and say, okay, we're sorry, we made it all up. We were trying to start something new for whatever reason, and we made it up, but it's not true. But that's not what we see. We see James, we see Paul, we see Peter all going to their death, amongst many others, because they would not give up that they themselves believed they had seen Jesus resurrected from the dead. So I think we have very good reason to believe that the New Testament documents, and specifically the accounts about the resurrection of Jesus, are true and accurate and reliable. So as much as this might be true, well, so what? So what if Jesus rose from the dead? What does it mean for you and for me? Well, if Jesus is indeed who he claimed to be, God in the flesh, someone who came to bring us life and life in abundance, as he claimed that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that nobody comes to God the Father but through him, if those are his claims, then I think if he rose from the dead, we know that those are true. And that means that these have huge implications for our lives. It means that he is God in the flesh. And when we come to him, then he is actually able to forgive our sin, to give us that new life. And we can trust him when he says that one day he is coming back to make all things new, to wipe away every tear, and to bring God's right and just judgment, to put things right. So I believe that Jesus is who he claimed to be. I believe that he rose from the dead. And I encourage you, pick up a Bible, read these accounts for yourselves, and decide, did Jesus really rise from the dead?